Well, I don't know about you all, but growing up down in Miami, I enjoyed a good game of spades or two. The problem with my crowd of friends is that somebody was always trying to get over on somebody. You wonder how is it that every third game or every other week we play, it seems like the same people always had the big joker and the little joker. It seems like the same people always trump tight, as we call it. That is, if you're accustomed to playing spades, at least where I'm from, it means you've got a lot of spades in your hand. It means you can do a lot of cutting. That's part of the game. And so, that would incite a lot of animosity and anger in the opponents, obviously, because you find yourself trying to do the right thing and you look up and it seems like the person to your right or the person to your left, when they look at each other a certain way, a series of cards just magically pop out. Even when you count the deck. And you look and you see and you say, how in the world do they keep on winning? So, naturally, you fall into the temptation of trying to outwit the one who's been outwitting you. So you find yourself sliding cards under your seat. You find yourself sticking cards under the table. You find yourself just perforating the edge of one card so that you know what card it is in the deck. You find yourself resorting to all sorts of things to outwit one another. And then once they pick up on the fact that they've gotten outwit, what do? They go and they figure out your tactics and come up with new tactics. So all you do is play a game of outwitting each other instead of playing a game of spades. Well, that was my experience playing cards with my group of friends. I wish I could tell you that I was always honest and forthright in my dealings, but I was not. Occasionally I did as the Romans did, out of anger and frustration. And I won a few games while I was doing it. I do recognize that ultimately it came from the Lord. No, I say that tongue in cheek, but when we turn to our text, just as we had the here we go again refrain when playing with my friends, we have the here we go again refrain when we come to this next episode of Jacob and Laban. We know now that Jacob has been here for quite some time, and he's ready to go and to take hold of the promise that God has made to him of land. And the text tells us that after Joseph was born, Jacob was ready to take off. Jacob served his uncle. He did all that was asked of him, and he said, I'm ready to go back to my land. And what we see in the verses that follow is another episode of witty blessings, of people trying to outwit one another. I want to give credit here to Dr. Bruce Walke for assisting in the 2 points here. We see first the witty contract, and we see secondly the witty contest. We see the contract between the two schemers, and then we see the contest between the two schemers. Verses 25 through 34 and 35 through 43 respectively. If we look first, we see the witty contract. Verse 25 through 34, we see here Jacob's request to depart. The text tells us that when Joseph was born, Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given to you. So Jacob is saying, listen, I did all that you requested of me. I followed to the T your customs. You hoodwinked me. The deceiver was disciplined by another deceiver. Now he says, I've honestly made my gains. My family has grown in accordance with God's promise, albeit through some unusual circumstances. God is in the business of working through the brokenness. But he says, I've served you. I've done all that's required of me, and I've done it honestly. Now, please let me depart to be with my family, to go to the home that the Lord has promised me. Now look here at Laban's response. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. So we see here, again, it seems like, here we go again with Laban and his antics. The man wants to leave. He's done all that's asked of him, and Laban's like, let me just slow that down 1 second. Let's have a talk. Notice that he, by divination, figures out that God has blessed him through Jacob. Divination would be a practice that's forbidden later in Leviticus 19 and Deuteronomy 18 because it reaches out to other spiritual forces, assuming that they are ultimately the ones in control of God's creation. And that's unpleasing in God's sight. But notice, ironically, how he uses this pagan means to profess a godly deed. So God just sits there and laughs and says, go ahead and engage in divining practices, but you will still recognize ultimately that I am the one from whom all blessings flow. He has to acknowledge here that I've been blessed because of you. And we can't just read this text in isolation because we have to remember that in chapter 28, we can go even further to chapter 12 of Genesis, that God promised to Abraham that in your offspring, all the families of the earth will be blessed. I'll bless you with offspring. I'll bless you with land. I'll bless you with material. God makes good on that word to Abraham. God says to Isaac in chapter 26 that the same promise that I made to Abraham applies to you as well. You are the next patriarch in the succession of patriarchs. And then we get to Genesis chapter 28. And God at Bethel comes to Jacob in a dream. Jacob's laughing. And the Lord tells him once again that I will provide for you, that I will bless you, I will curse those who curse you, I will bless you with materials, that in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. You will have blessing, you will be an instrument, and you will have protection. And we see all of that in his exchange with Laban. Jacob has received a family. Jacob has helped Laban's house expand materially. So God has worked through him. So we see God fulfilling his promises in this exchange. And here we have wicked and corrupt Laban having to profess that this is the reality, that your God did bring this about. So we can't just read this text in isolation. We have to understand it in the broader scheme of things, that God makes good on his word. Now, what's interesting about this episode right here is that God blesses Laban even though Laban does harm to Jacob. God said, I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. How much greater, one scholar has said, will God's blessing be upon those who bless his people? But we see here that God's about to make good on his word to set things right with Laban, that God's going to bless Jacob. We'll see more and more as this story goes on and into next week, that God is a God of justice. And we may not experience God's justice the way we want to, but he will right all wrongs. He will set all things straight eventually. And Laban gets a taste of God's justice with his wicked antics. So as we move on here, we see that Laban says to him that in verse 28, name your wages and I'll give it. And so here we go again. And this should be a foreshadow for us that Laban is once again up to something. If you'll remember, when Jacob arrived at Laban's house, he said, you're my family. Just because you're my family, does that mean you should work for nothing? What are your wages? So what Laban does is take a familiar bond and turn it into an economic transaction. The righteous thing for Laban to do is help his family and to give him a fast start, to give him a safe start to produce for his own family. But what Laban does is withhold blessing. What Laban does is trick his own flesh and blood. What Laban does is corrupt the situation by manipulating all parties involved and keeping more years of labor on Jacob's account and keeping his daughter. So he contracts out his daughter so that he can keep one who provides good labor. So this man is a wicked man. He's a sex trafficker. He's a pimp. He's all those things. This is a man that needs Jesus. He's got some serious, deep issues. And I don't want to sanitize this man's character for you one bit at all. Laban is, as they say where I'm from, a piece of work. And so we see here again that he has resorted to the old tendencies again. What are your wages? So we see here that Laban is probably doing like this. I know I can probably pull a fast one on you again if you give me the number. Ted DiBiase said everybody's got a price back in the old WWF, the $1 Million Man. Verse 29, Jacob said to him, you yourself know how I have served you and how your livestock has fared with me. So Jacob responds to him, listen, I've done all that's asked of you. You saw how God's blessing has been upon your house because of the labor that I've done. You see God's blessing through me. And what we have here just reminds us so much of Laban's attitude once again back in Genesis 24. When Abraham's servant went to find Isaac a wife. He finds Rebekah. And they agree that this is from the Lord. And Laban says, hey, can we just hold on to it for 10 more days? And the servant says, please, if this is God's plan, do not thwart it. Don't get in the way. Do not slow us down. Let me return to my master's house. So we see this shyster in Laban. We see this trickster who keeps on trying to interrupt and interfere, it seems, with God's plan. Now here we are again. And God has promised Jacob that you can return to your home. And Laban's like, hey, let me slow this process down again. We see the tendency of the world to slow us down from pursuing God's plan. We see the tendency of the world to slow us down from obedience to God's word. We see the tendency of the world to keep our focus on this land and not the land to come. We got to be discerning. We got to be wise and aware of the world's tactics to delay us from moving in accordance with God's will. Look at Jacob's proposal, a righteous man here. He says, what shall I give you? Going down to verse 31. After he requests, I want to provide for my family now. What shall I give you? Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. So what Jacob does is say here, here's a proposal. Go through the flock. Let me go through the flock, and I'll take out all the undesirable among the flock. Take out all the undesirable goat, lamb, and sheep, etc., etc. The ones who are spotted, the ones who are striped, the ones that don't fit the bill. And I will keep them. So Jacob imposes a strong self-inflicting disadvantage upon himself, if you will. Jacob places himself at great disadvantage for the sake of Laban's prosperity. This is a righteous man saying, listen, I will do this for you. Just give me the ones that you don't want. And here's Laban. Laban finds that desirable because Laban knows that, well, if he takes the undesirable ones, it's going to be quite difficult for him to produce when he's watching my flock. So Laban has just got all sorts of things in his mind. Now look at the, continue looking at it. He says, I'll take all the undesirables and I'll watch over your flock. And if anything that's found that's plain in my flock, you'll know that it was stolen because you've already separated yours. Beloved, we see here that Jacob is fully assured of God's blessing on his life. Why is that? Because if we turn over to Genesis 31, verses 10 through 13, God came to him in a vision and told him, I see what Laban is doing to you. And God tells him what's going to happen. God essentially says, I am on your side. I will care for you. I will remain true to my word. And so he stands back and he trusts God. His proposal is based on God's word of promise. And to Laban, he might be saying, this man is foolish. I'm about to pull a fast one on him again. He must not have learned from the last 14 years. But what we ought to see here is that Jacob is armed with God's promise. Beloved, I want to submit to us that our hope for the present and the future is in God's word of God's sure word of promise and his past faithfulness amidst our times of recurring difficulties, setbacks, and losses. What is our hope? Our hope is in the God who has provided for us. Our hope is in the God who has made good on his word already. And our hope is in the God who shows up amidst our difficulties, the God who shows up when we experience loss, the God who shows up when we experience setbacks, when we experience those situations that are too great for us to overcome. Our hope is not in the schemes of this world. Our hope is not in manipulation. Our hope is not in corner cutting. Our hope is in the God who promises to care for us according to his word and makes good on that. We see here, secondly, the witty contest. First, we see the witty contract. Now we see the witty contest in verses 35 through 43. So as we move on here, the text tells us, but that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in charge of his sons. Beloved, I cannot say anything more than this man is just flat out wicked. If you'll recall, the contract stipulated that Jacob gets to go through the flock and separate out all the undesirables. But what does Laban do? He stacks the deck. He goes in himself. He goes in himself and brings the population of the flock down. Not only does he do that, not only does he go in himself, decreasing the population, but he separates them 3 days apart. 3 days apart. So Jacob is 3 days apart from his flock, tending to Laban's way out in some remote, distant plain. So he goes in first, he separates them 3 days apart, and then he appoints his sons over Jacob's flock. So Jacob is bent on ensuring, Laban is bent on ensuring Jacob's misery. Laban is a man who enriches himself at the expense of others. That's textbook unrighteousness. The righteous man denies himself for the sake of others. The wicked man enriches himself at the expense of others. That's what we have here in this text, that Laban is stacking the deck as much as he can against Jacob. We see the great contrast between these two men's actions. Jacob's proposal consisted of denying himself, and Laban's actions consisted of self-aggrandizement to the denial of others. And beloved, I want to submit to us this morning, lest we judge Laban too quickly. We need to examine that in our own hearts. Because we oftentimes love God's blessing without the character development that comes with it. And sometimes that involves cutting corners. Sometimes that involves stepping on people's heads. Sometimes that involves stepping around people, over people, and running through people to get what we want. And the Lord says that that's unrighteous. We enrich ourselves at the expense of others. That's displeasing and dishonorable in the Lord's sight. What we have here in Jacob is a man who denies himself for the sake of the community. What we have in Laban is a man who uses the community for the sake of himself. But look here now as we move on Jacob's scheme. In verse 37, it says that then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. As we move through here, let me explain what Jacob is doing. It is noble of him that he trusts in the Lord and proceeds with a plan that seems to put him at a disadvantage. But recall now that he has God's promise, he has God's dream, he has God's vision, he has God's command, he has God's assurance that he's going to return to the land. Think back to Genesis 28, verses 13 and following. Look ahead to Genesis 31, verses 9 and following, and you will see that sandwiched between those two episodes is Jacob. Okay, you'll see the story right here of Jacob and Laban. So God came to him ahead of time and said, I've got this. So all he had to do was trust the Lord, and the situation would work out. But he sort of puts a little small spot on this situation, if you will, because he resorts to superstition to try to carry this plan out. He knows that God is going to provide, But now he tries to give a little bit of credit to the other forces, the other spiritual forces, if you will. This whole idea of of placing different images in front of the goats before they're mating is one. Excuse me. So what he's engaging in is this superstitious practice of placing vivid images in front of the animals while they mate, hoping that they would come out like the colors or the stripes or the patterns of the things that they're viewing. All right, so it's some sort of prenatal vivid imagery that supposedly leads to striped offspring. Okay, so that was a superstition, that was a prevailing thought in the ancient Near East during his time. There were all sorts of wives' tales like that, and we might shake our head and laugh, but we know all the wives' tales that are associated with with birth in the modern age. Okay, I've heard a litany of things. If you try this, you do that. If you drink this, if you eat that, listen, the Lord blessed me with 3 girls and a 4th on the way. I think the Lord has the final say at the end of the day. All right, amen? I don't know about the wives' tale stuff, okay? So in other words, what Jacob does is resort to these other myths, hoping that it will produce striped animals, okay? And so now, as he moves on, we see that he places the stronger animals up front to breed. Now, there's also some science behind this. It could very well be that Jacob is very versed in zoology. He understands that the dominant animals carry the recessive color gene, Aaron. So if we place them together, the plain animals that are strong, that carry the recessive gene, will produce the striped and spotted animals. It could very well be that Jacob is an early ancient Near Eastern zoologist. But in all likelihood, Jacob is resorting to old, witty, manipulative, superstitious means to procure God's blessings, albeit still trusting that the Lord will provide for him. We see here, beloved, that God is the ultimate cause of our blessing. It's not our wits, and it's not our might, it's not our craft. Oftentimes, God will show up despite our craft, despite our wits, despite our talents and creativity, just to remind us that, yes, I can work through, but make no mistake about it, that I'm not beholden to work through your wicked and corrupt ways. That's God's goodness to us. Not to let us run off thinking that we are the ultimate source of our blessing. You heard it in the prayer earlier this morning by a coach that the Lord owns all the 100 of our possession. Not just a part of it, all of the 100 comes from God. No matter how smart, no matter how talented we are, no matter how crafty, no matter how slick we are, it all belongs to God. But what I also want us to see here is something about God's mercy in this exchange. Thus, the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. So he engages in this practice. He places the ones up front so that they can produce more for himself. We see here that God specializes in removing obstacles that are too difficult for us to overcome. We see that plain and simple. Laban is walking away, slapping his hands, saying, I've got him again. And God uses that very scheme created by Laban to bless Jacob. Psalm 7:14 and 15 tells us, the wicked man digs a pit, digging it out, and falls into the hole that he has made. You see, and when we fall into the pits that we make, it's by God's mercy as his people, not let us continue going on. It's his mercy. It's his chastisement, so that we would be more conformed to the image of his son, Jesus. When the wicked fall in the pit, it's God's justice. And Laban is experiencing a taste of God's promise to Jacob to care for him, to curse those who curse him. And the very thing that Laban used to try to deny Jacob is the thing that the Lord used to bless him. That's the kind of God we serve. Nothing will stand in God's way. When God makes a promise, he'll carry it out. When God says that he will accomplish his purposes in and through us, he will carry it out. Not even us in our own sin and wickedness can stop God from doing what he said he's going to do. That's how merciful God is. That's how just God is as well. What a hope for us. What a hope for God's people throughout the ages. That no manner of wit can stop him from accomplishing his purposes. This here episode is a small picture, is a microcosmic example of God's pattern of redemption. Just as Jacob was exiled into Mesopotamia and blessed and delivered by God, so too the Israelites, his descendants, increased in Egypt, were blessed by God with possessions from Pharaoh and Egypt, and then delivered by God through his mighty hand of judgment on the Egyptians who held his people in captivity. We see God's pattern of redemption in our lives. And Jesus Christ, the true Israel, is the one in whom this is ultimately fulfilled, who was called out of Egypt, who lived the perfect life that you and I could not live. And then through the greatest act known to mankind, the death of Jesus Christ on the cross, he outwits the forces of darkness, thereby securing all of our salvation. And this same Jesus is calling people to himself from every nation, every tribe, every tongue, every language. And this same Jesus, according to Paul in Ephesians 1, has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places right now. It belongs to us in Christ. And for those of us who are in Christ, we too have a plot of the eternal promised land. God indeed is the wittiest of them all. Please pray with me.